Welcome to Soul Science, the official podcast of Sports and Exercise Podiatry Australasia.
Each episode, we sit down with leading clinicians, researchers and innovators from across sports medicine, biomechanics and podiatry to unpack the ideas shaping our profession. From cutting-edge research and clinical pearls to career journeys, controversial topics and lessons learned along the way, we're here to bridge the gap between science and practice.
Whether you're a student, clinician, researcher, or simply passionate about human movement, join us as we explore the evidence, challenge assumptions, and discover what it takes to keep people performing at their best. This is Soul Science. John Charles.
Evening.
I'm quite excited about tonight because we have a very special episode for our listeners. This is the first time we're running a panel. Let's step right into it. Today's episode is a special panel of Soul Science, bringing together some of the leading voices shaping the future of custom foot orthoses across clinical practice, manufacturing, and digital innovation in Australia. This is not a single perspective, that is the ecosystem. Tonight, we're joined by a panel that represents the full spectrum of orthotic development, from clinician to lab, from traditional craftsmanship to advanced digital workflows. First up, we have Kent Sweeting. He's the owner of Queensland Orthotic Lab and a clinician researcher with over 2 decades of experience across private practice, academia, and manufacturing. A first-class honours graduate from QUT, Kent's work is in Achilles tendinopathy and has been recognised nationally and is a contributing author to Bruckner & Kahn's Clinical Sports Medicine. He has served as the president of formerly APSM, now CEPA, worked within the 2018 Commonwealth Games Polyclinic, and continues to contribute to high-performance environments, including Queensland Ballet. We also have up next Rhys Pierce. He's the general manager of Footwork, bringing a unique perspective as both a clinician and a senior leader in orthotic manufacturing. After establishing and growing a multidisciplinary podiatry clinic, Rhys transitioned into a lab environment where he oversees the broader Footwork operation. His experience across both sides of the profession provides a rare insight into how orthotics are prescribed, produced, and scaled in modern practice. Thirdly, we have Konrad Job. He's a podiatrist specializing in orthotic technology and digital manufacturing systems. He's closely involved in the development of LaserCam Orthotics platform and works across clinics, laboratories, and universities to advance how orthoses are designed and produced. Konrad also plays a key role in educating clinicians on 3D scanning, digital workflows, while contributing to ongoing research exploring differences in foot capture techniques. And lastly, we have Darcy Dore. He's a sports podiatrist at the Running Clinic in Brisbane, with a clinical focus on running-related injuries and performance. Alongside his clinical work, Darcy is involved in research with QUT, exploring advanced footwear and material science. Through his work with Propel 3D, Darcy is helping bringing in-house orthotic manufacturing into clinics, utilizing 3D printing, TPU materials to reshape turnaround times, customization, and clinician control. Gentlemen, thanks for coming on tonight.
Welcome.
Good to be with you guys.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Pat. Thanks, JC.
I guess in a rare opportunity, we have a panel tonight rather than individual guests, so we're going to throw this to the floor, and I'll probably start with you first, Kent. How do you define success when you're looking at orthosis in clinical practice, and what are your markers for success?
I think for me, success is when the orthotic changes the load in the way that the clinician intended, and the patient can comfortably tolerate that change. So, we need the orthotic to be comfortable, but we need to get to a certain endpoint. So sometimes that might be symptom resolution, but other times it's reducing tissue stress to enable a loading progression. I guess that's how I would define it.
Darcy?
I would definitely second Kent's version there. I think that an orthotic that is modifying the load that needs to be modified in order for the person to do what they need to do. And obviously sometimes that's temporary, a lot of the times it's not, and it looks very different for different people. But sometimes we're thinking more about kinematic changes, sometimes more about kinetic if we can measure them. But yeah, I'd second Kent's points.
Rhys, I'll probably direct you next, but just to add on to that question, I guess you've lived through a career where you've transitioned from traditional orthotic manufacturing to now more 3D printing. How do you define success, and has that changed since you've adopted new technologies?
Yeah, so it's a good question, Pat, because I'd say probably halfway through my now career is when we did see that change around 2019 into 3D printing. And I don't necessarily think the change in material or manufacturing technique has changed my perspective on clinical outcomes. For me, it's about the patient journey and the patient outcomes. When someone presents, to the clinic, are they presenting because of their pain, or are they presenting because their lack of ability to, run or compete in a sub 5 hour half iron like JC on the weekend? So is it about the pain that they're presenting, or is it the lack of or the ability or inability to actually compete or do what they want to do? It may just be as simple as keeping up with their kids. So for me, it's about defining what that outcome is. And if we can achieve that outcome through the use of orthoses or combining that with other treatment options, that helps to define success for me.
Cool. And as obviously you guys all work in the laboratory environment, and I guess I'm interested to know, like, where from a lab end, where do you feel like your measure of success comes from the orthotic? Like, is it people reordering orthotics? Is it kind of, happy? Is it the relationship you build up with a podiatrist, or are you really interested in the end result when it comes to patients?
I think personally, JC, if that was directed at me, I really get satisfaction around podiatrists when they not just have their patients' successful outcomes, the orthotic is matching their expectation as well. And I think we see that when podiatrists really invest in understanding terminology and also understand processes of orthotic manufacture as well. So, when people come back and say, look, the orthotic achieved exactly what I wanted to achieve on the fitting and consultation, and then follow up down the track and say, look, my patient's now pain-free, or they're able to compete in a certain event or play football on the weekend, etc. That's success in my perspective.
Konrad, can you tell us your perspective on success and how your orthotic laboratory, I guess, developed over the years?
A big question. I'd have to sort of reiterate a lot of what the other panelists said, and on Rhys's comment about markers in their quality of life, like stripping it back to the important things for the individual patient. Like I think Rhys said, walking with their kids, having a grandpa be able to go to the park and enjoy spending time with their family to a greater extent. If you strip it back to the orthotic itself, you might be looking at initially whether it simply matches the prescription in the clinic, having a certain series of checks to make sure, are all the features that I requested in the correct locations? Does it properly fit the footwear? Does it fit the foot in a weight-bearing position out of shoes and within shoes? And then, making sure that the patient understands the purpose of the devices and, engaging with the treatment. And of course, comfort, as the other panelists said as well. I don't think many podiatrists would be doing, 100 millimeter visual analog scales of like comfort and pain, but of course some would, but usually it's just sort of a conversation. I think more interestingly, we see measures of success, like for me, working with maybe hospitals where they have in-tube PEDAR systems and things like that, where you can get more objective data on reductions in pressure to see more visible change in healing of ulcers and things like that. So, and what was the second part to your question there, Pat?
Tell us about the history of LaserCam and, short and sweet, and tell us how your product's been developed.
Yeah, well, it actually started in 1997. There was actually 4 podiatrists that started the lab. It was called Adelaide Podiatry Group. It's before my time. I think I was about 8 years old. And at the time, we were using a system called AmFit, which I'm sure everyone knows. And the old owner at the time, who was a great boss, but a very polarizing figure in the profession as well, he started developing his own software because he wanted more control over the entire CAD process. So since then, it's been purchased by 3 new owners. We're under a different umbrella now called GMZ Medical, but we're basically just continuing to write software and try and improve our CAD. That's our focus.
Awesome. I guess we'll move on to a slightly more controversial topic. So I guess we're quite interested to know, what your guys' views are on, I guess you could call it the overprescription of orthotics, or maybe prescribing orthotics in cases where they're not required or patients are asymptomatic. Where do you guys stand on it? And I guess it's for anyone to kind of chip in initially. Do you feel like the orthotics are often overprescribed when other approaches could be taken first?
I think we're currently in a landscape where footwear can make a really big difference to pressure and loads on the bottom of the feet. So orthotics are obviously can be overprescribed by podiatrists, where having the shoes be able to do so much of that work, it's just making our job, I think, a lot easier and probably a little bit less likely to overprescribe, considering the shoe can do quite a bit. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I think it's a very difficult question to answer from a lab perspective because, from a lab perspective, we're just trying to manufacture the best possible product based on our prescription. So our role isn't really to determine someone's justification, essentially, for the orthotics. But, I guess for me, I don't really see orthotics as much of a performance device, more of it as like a treatment modality. So, I think prevention in asymptomatic patients gets a little bit grey, especially for pediatric populations where it's not justified a custom orthotic compared to something like a prefab. And I think our focus should probably be more on conditions that are symptomatic or clearly limiting function and quality of life. I'd just say that maybe a caveat is like, it might not be this way forever. We can see that modern footwear, as you brought it up, it definitely influences performance significantly. What is it? Like every world record from 5K to marathon or something has been broken in the last, how many years? 5 years or something like that?
2017, I think.
Yeah, so I don't think it's unreasonable to, have clinicians that have very specific sports focused, experience the prescribing for performance reasons, but that's just not me because I'm not in that role.
Yeah, I think as a profession, being podiatry, it's really important to not necessarily contribute to the hysteria of overprescribing. I think one of certainly my clinical ethos is pathomechanical prescribing. Are we prescribing based on a pathological presentation in combination with a mechanical assessment as well? So if you can then sort of measure that pathomechanical finding and as part of your patient's treatment journey, contribute to that with like an orthomechanical device, it's justified. But as Darcy said, the use of like a holistic treatment approach with footwear, load-based exercise treatments, I think is really important as well. And like we mentioned, before with footwear, obviously footwear has contributed significantly to performance, but has it also contributed to, injury as well? I certainly see a lot more patients present laterally loading through the use of low density, midsole shoes when, that's not necessarily the most appropriate treatment option for them, albeit, that shoe may be overprescribed. So I think definitely podiatry needs to retain, I guess, a high level of education around orthotics, and these sorts of sessions will contribute to that, but also at the university level, at the educational level as well.
Kent, do you want to weigh in?
Yeah, look, don't disagree with anything that's been said by the other panelists there. I guess my only point to add to that is from a purely athletic performance or high performance, lens, and really, in that sort of population, I guess we need to ask ourselves, is there morphology interacting with their training load in a way that deserves intervention. So, that group of individuals, we might use that lens a little more so than, say, an asymptomatic pediatric patient.
Good one. All right. Next question up for the panel, and I'll probably start with Rhys with this one. Who owns orthotics as a profession? Should podiatrists remain the people who prescribe orthoses? Because we know chiropractors, physiotherapists, even some sports doctors to a degree. We've got one around the corner who prints his own. Who should own this? Because, and I get we get the private health insurance codes, but is it something that's within our scope to keep?
Yeah, Pat, I'll throw it back to you. What is an orthotic?
That's a very good question.
Because if we're talking about custom foot orthoses, based on a 3D scan or a plaster cast or a physical impression, I think podiatrists need to own that as a profession.
Yep.
We're all aware of other professions, prescribing certain types of in-shoe devices, but I think custom foot orthoses, manufactured from a scan or a physical impression, it needs to be something that the podiatry profession continues to own and educate and grow, because it is, at the end of the day, as you said, a private health podiatry specific intervention, which would, I guess, suggest that it is something that podiatrists should continue to excel in over other professions.
Darcy?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point Rhys made, that it is important for the podiatrist to be the most proficient at prescribing foot orthotics, and also that if another profession is prescribing, that they may not be using an actual scan and impression of the foot. So yeah, look, I also do think that some simple prescriptions could be done by a non-podiatrist, where there's a clear evidence base for, say, if it was patellofemoral pain for a simple foot orthotic, or a plantar foot problem that can be usually improved by some medial support. Obviously there's a bit of space for that to go wrong, but I think that it could be helpful. I think podiatrist books are generally pretty full for the most part, and people can buy all sorts of things on the internet. So having a competent physiotherapist prescribe a basic off-the-shelf medial supporting device is not the biggest problem that I see. But I do think that, as Rhys said, podiatrists should be able to have the ownership over things that are more specialized and provide the most quality foot orthotics for whatever outcome we're trying to achieve.
Can I interject here? And I'll probably direct this at Kent, because I'm building on that original question. If we're talking about foot capture foundations, right? Whether that be plaster cast, slipper sock, foam boxing, or scanning with various technology we have now. If there's no solid sort of evidence to say is one better than the other, right? And it sounds like anyone can really capture a foot, apart from people who go to uni to do plaster casting, because that's, I guess, probably the only refined technique that requires high repeatability. Kent, what are your thoughts on foot capture methods, right? Does the perfect position matter?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think, to your first point around, this who owns orthotics or custom orthotics, so to speak, I think it comes down to clinical reasoning, and orthotic therapy really belongs with the profession that has the deepest understanding of foot structure, lower limb function, tissue stress, etc. And that's podiatry. That's, we should absolutely be proud of that. So I think if another profession can perform a thorough assessment, understand forefoot to rear foot relationship, to your point, prescribe from a defined reference position, all of those sorts of things, then maybe there's some scope there. But I think, to the second part of your question, a high quality capture, must represent a clinical meaningful position and one that the orthotic can generate a desired mechanical effect from. So, I think having that reference point at the start and having that being a consistent, repeatable reference point, I think that's a critical. I think we all understand the variability, in orthotic manufacture and orthotic therapy, broadly speaking. So, my interpretation is why add another variable into it? If we can be pretty consistent with our starting point, then surely that's going to be more helpful than adding in more inconsistency.
So just talking about foot captures, and maybe just one for Konrad, like is there a perfect position? Like as a lab, can you easily pick up when a capture's been done poorly? And are there things that people commonly do badly when it comes to foot captures?
Yeah, so obviously, like, it's a really hard question because on the one hand, I want to answer it by saying that I want everything to be done in a repeatable way, that's very consistent. But, I think the intent behind how the foot is captured is important as well. For example, like if we look at fully weight-bearing scanning, right, it is the most repeatable way to capture a foot, right? It's going to have good inter-rater reliability between all of us. We get someone to stand up and press go on the scanner. But I think the more important question with it is it's only repeatable for one part of the process, and which part of the process is repeatability important for. So, I just captured 20 subjects for a scan that we're doing with Flinders Uni in 7 different positions, and I'm fairly confident on the reliability intra-rater of the scanning methods, but the repeatability on its own doesn't necessarily make it the most appropriate capture for the orthotic. So we've had situations where, we've had a clinician send us a fully weight-bearing scan, and although the capture method is repeatable, the podiatrist being, surprised and disappointed when the orthotic comes back flat. I'm sure that every person here, like at the lab environment, has had that situation. We get a fully weight-bearing scan and the orthotic comes back flat, and it's a little bit unexpected. So I guess in summary, like with foot capture, what we try and educate is to have like an intention behind the shape that you're capturing, because the purpose is to match the shape of the scan to the final product as closely as possible, so you can better understand, how you're applying prescription variables to the surface of the orthotic. So it's not necessarily one way at all times. It could change, and it might even be pathology driven in the end. I'm not really sure. So I don't think anyone knows the perfect answer yet. So.
Rhys, I guess your laboratory accepts all sorts of products from plaster casting to 3D scanning. Do you have a preference, or what's your sort of take on how the foundations of foot capture should be processed?
Yeah, lots of good points raised so far. I think combining this with the previous question of what should podiatrists be, or how should podiatry sit in the scheme of orthotics, I think podiatrists should choose the highest quality of capture. We've got research now around higher quality versus lower quality, accuracy and reliability, reproducibility of certain scanning modalities. And I think if podiatry wants to own that product, being orthotics or 3D custom foot orthotics, it should continue to accept the highest level. So we know nowadays things like LiDAR and True Depth are widely available for everyone who has an iPhone or everyone who has an iPad Pro, but we know they have a higher variability rate compared to iCubes, E500s, iCube Minis, structure sensor scanners, which provide consistency across a range of devices. So, look, I think, like Konrad said, we'd all like the perfect world where every scan is high quality and produced in the same system. But I think as long as we know that there is confidence in accuracy and reliability of the scanning modality, it should be accepted. Position is important, agree, and we do see some obscure positions. But I think one of the most important things there is contact your lab and speak to your lab and ask them about their processes and how they prefer, scanning and how that influences the orthotic design and manufacture. And collectively, you'll get the outcome that you're looking for.
Awesome. This question, I'll initially direct it to Darcy, given that he works in an environment where you're producing orthotics at the chair side, or very quickly. Have you found with 3D printed orthotics, like you lose something in terms of your capacity to modify or adjust orthotics? I mean, is the future just reprinting another set of orthotics when the circumstances change?
Yeah, I guess by further illuminating the question, obviously we've had SLS 3D printed for a while, through the major labs. In terms of what we've been doing with Propel 3D, being more the FDM printing where you have the small 3D printer that is able to be put in the clinic's laboratory and then have the orthotic printed out there. So we'll call it the FDM printed devices. The ability to modify through the bottom, compared to an EVA, for example, where it's a continuous material the whole way through, it's not quite as good. Where you can start to go through the top shells essentially, or the bottom shells, and it's not as a continuous material like EVA is. So maybe a little bit, but it's not really rocket science in terms of being able to modify how you'd like it, and then have the device still maintain a high quality and structural integrity. The other thing with the FDM printed orthotics is that there's actually dramatically less need to modify them in the first place, oftentimes, particularly with the ability just to create the actual solid device in terms of the dimensions and the shape to just drop straight into the shoe. So that's probably been one of the key advantages. Other key advantages just being the turnaround times. You can get the modifications to be very specific. Can obviously tune the densities, use different materials. Have your person with a high pressure lesion come in in the morning and then dispense the foot orthotic in the afternoon in the same clinic. But you haven't really found many downsides that don't compete with downsides of other types of devices in terms of the grass being greener on the other side and just having different problems.
Can I just follow on with what John was asking? And let's talk about 3D printing orthotics in the aspect where you can print the post, right? And
Yep.
and obviously you can also print the heel raise on there. What about in cases where you really need to be able to adjust either the post or the raise, right? And when you grind 3D, like PA nylon, for example, it goes into this like pasty-like substance, and it becomes extremely difficult to grind. Like, are we in an environment where 3D printing is really great, it's scalable? Should we just be printing the shells?
Look, I guess to start with, I I'd love to get the input of the other labs who are 3D printing, but my experience with 3D printing, both in a lab environment and in a clinical environment, and appreciate that there's some difference in machinery between what you've got available in a clinic versus a lab, but there is a bit of a myth that you can't adjust 3D printed devices. I do hear it from time to time, and it's not something that I find to be true. So I guess first and foremost, I probably want to just clarify that I don't have problems modifying, a PA11 or we're doing a lot more polyprope 3D printed devices that do grind and work much better than the nylon material. Yes, they work differently to EVA. Yes, they work differently to your traditional handcrafted stuff. But you can absolutely grind and adjust both of those types of devices. Is that something that you guys come across much, Rhys?
Yeah, I think where the misconception may be is when people try and recreate the device. is the device fundamentally wrong? And do you need to fundamentally change the orthotic? Because you're not going to be able to achieve that in a 3D printed like PA11 device. Whereas, if I've got a EVA device like in my hand, and I have a high point of medial cuneiform base of first, and it's 30 mil higher, I can make that more proximal by grinding distally and reduce the arch height. So if the orthotic is fundamentally wrong, you're not going to be able to achieve that. But basic modifications within PA11 and other 3D printed, I think, is very easily achieved.
I agree with that, and Kent's for sure.
I think
Yeah. I'd just add that, the main area that we've had fitting issues with 3D printed devices was just mainly at the heel post. And, you can do really simple things in clinic, like get a pair of calipers or a fabric tape measure and just measure the internal width of the shoe to the stitching. And then the lab can design the 3D printed post so it doesn't need to be tapered in the clinic. Like, it's very simple. The angle on the heel post, if it was extrinsically posted for some of the 3D prints, definitely is more aggressive than the 400 density EVA, just because it's a higher density material. So just making clinicians aware of that change, or modifying prescriptions to potentially use heel skyves or intrinsic rear foot posting on the top surface of the shell instead of extrinsically angulating the post. So yeah, and same as what Kent said as well, we've gravitated more towards polypropylene for those clinicians that preferred a little bit more adjustability, because I think the density difference is about 1100 the PA11 to 800 the poly powder. So it translates to being, a little bit lighter, a little bit easier to grind, and a little bit easier to heat. But PA11 is certainly not impossible to adjust either. So
yeah, I think really what we need to get our head around is a 3D printed device might look a little bit different in some of the design features, specifically things like extrinsic posting. But I can get a device that functions the same as a handcrafted device with an EVA post, but it just looks a little bit different. So it's just about understanding the material properties, knowing how to work with them, and adjusting scripts accordingly if you are making the change from handcrafted to 3D printed.
All right, moving on. Darcy and Rhys, I think I'll probably hit you guys with this question. Lab clinician relationships. I know I've gone through multiple labs since, starting as a new graduate. Where do you think the biggest disconnect exists between a clinician and a lab, and how important is it for a fully functional, customized orthotic laboratory to have podiatrists on staff to be able to interpret those questions and those relationships?
Rhys, I can let you go first for this one.
Yeah, sure. So I think it's important for podiatrists or labs to have podiatrists on staff to have those conversations, with customers. It's really important that you build relationships with the podiatrists at the lab so you understand the terminology. Terminology is really important when, I guess, changing products or changing anything really, because what you may have been used to at Kmart is called something different at Big W, no different to orthotic products. So building that relationship is really important, investing the time in the educational platforms, workshops, and as a lab, I think you need to be highly accessible to your customers as well so that you can provide a high quality product and high quality service as well.
In terms of that process, where do you feel like the biggest challenges are there in terms of that do you find that there are cases where there are disconnects between the clinician and the lab?
Yeah, I think so. And I think there can be. Everyone at certain times can be time poor. And, if you're a sole business owner, or even if you run a business with half a dozen or more employees, your time is really important. So you need to prioritize where you put that time, and investing in building a relationship with your lab, I think, is a high priority if you consider orthotic therapy to be important to your clinic and to your business as well. So making sure that you make the time, and the lab should, return equally by making that time available to you as well, whether it's emails, phone calls, online workshops, in-person workshops. I think all those need to be accessible to the consumer.
Yeah, I've had the experience of being, obviously the podiatrist that is ordering the orthotics and the podiatrist that is sort of designing and producing the orthotics. So I do think that close relationship is really important, and developing a shared language to be quite critical. I think that the prescription form is actually quietly really critical, and having the education platform, as Rhys said, just to be really important. I've made the habit just of reaching out to younger practitioners, where if I'm trying to interpret a script, and then potentially the quality of the scan is not very good, between those two things, using that as an indicator to try and reach out, have a chat, and just try and educate where I can, and clarify, and maybe help the practitioner. Because let's face it, orthotics, in terms of prescribing and fitting and managing expectations of orthotics, is not a simple thing to do. And I think that, I'll just say that, generally speaking, I don't think podiatrists on the whole are that amazing at it. There certainly are some very good podiatrists, and there are definitely some podiatrists who, through no fault of their own, find it quite challenging and don't get very good outcomes. So I do think that there is an onus on the lab representatives to try our best to close that gap.
Guys,
Awesome.
I think I also want to bring in like a broader economic question in terms of relationships. Think back to when you were a new grad, probably life was potentially a simpler time to where it is today. There's less wars, less fuel costs, and less orthotic lab costs, inflation, all that sort of stuff. So as a young new graduate coming out into the profession, right? Um, if they send a cast to multiple labs in Australia, will they get the exact same orthotic coming back in terms of from their prescription and from the design? Probably not. So what's your sort of advice to younger practitioners on how to better understand what laboratories you use, and how to refine their prescription? Ken, I'll probably start with you, given you've had a tremendous career in both podiatry and orthotic making.
Oh, look, I think it comes down to making sure that your relationship with your lab, as the other guys have already sort of talked about, making sure that relationship is collaborative and not transactional. So, where the lab isn't like your electricity provider, that's a more transactional, relationship in your business. I think it's critical that you develop that relationship with your lab, understand what they want from you in terms of input. And then as the guys said, having a podiatrist at the lab to understand what the intent is from the clinician is critical as well. So, we, like at the lab, if we were to see a script come through for a 95-year-old lady, and it was a rigid carbon fiber or a 6 mil polyprope shell, a transactional relationship would just make that and send it back. Whereas a collaborative one will actually get on the front foot and ring that new clinician and say, hey, look, we see Mrs. Jones here is 95, and she's got a tiny little foot. Is this what you're actually after, or did you actually just make a mistake because you were in a hurry, or you weren't entirely sure what you were selecting there? So that's what I mean about building that really collaborative relationship.
Awesome. I think there's some really good points there, Ken, in terms of building those relationships for new clinicians. I guess moving on forward now, future directions, and you don't have to reveal any trade secrets here, but where is orthotic therapy going in the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, look, I think probably the most obvious shift would be a continued move away from subtractive. We've all sort of slowly been phasing out of vacuum forming. It's very limited now, the availability of vacuum forming in Australia, and I think likely that subtractive and CNC will be next. We're not there yet there. Personally, doing TPU devices, we're not quite happy with what we're prototyping, but certainly that is the direction, and I think all the labs are aware of that. And maybe I think what is less clear about the direction is the type of delivery model, which we sort of talk about a little bit, which is, are we going to see more in-clinic manufacturing? Are we going to see more in-clinic design with external manufacturing? Or are we going to see, as some have pushed for, like lab design and in-clinic printing? So there might actually be multiple models operating at once in the profession which is going to be a little bit different, and they can probably all coexist. But what I do see there is like an amazing opportunity for podiatry, and it sort of goes back to like who owns orthotics, and we certainly don't really own it at the moment because they're dispensed by orthotists, prosthetists, podorthists, all sorts of professionals. But really embedding ourselves in the computer-aided design and having a much better understanding of that will be a big shift in the industry and really make sure podiatry really excels, I think. And maybe one more thing, a little bit more out of left field, will be probably more active orthotic devices popping up into the market. Things that are able to, basically have sensors embedded in wearable technologies and things like that, where like sensor technology continues to get cheaper and cheaper. So I think that'll be a really interesting push, but I foresee that being in probably over 10 years more widespread, not within the next 10 years.
Rhys, where are things going at Footwork?
Yeah, I think broadly speaking, not necessarily at Footwork solely, but I think like orthotic therapy is going to become more accessible to the consumer or to the customer, whether that's online platforms like e-commerce platforms. I think it's harder or becoming harder to see a podiatrist. I think it's really important as a profession that we continue to invest in podiatry and invest in custom foot orthoses, because at the same time, it's also going to become easier for the consumer to access the product externally. So yeah, certainly Footwork is all about empowering the podiatrist, empowering the individual. So giving them the ability to be involved in the process of that orthotic manufacture and orthotic design. So education, providing different platforms for, designing in-house, printing or manufacturing in-house as well. But all about empowering the podiatrist to achieve what they want to achieve.
I think I'll echo Konrad's sentiment about the evolving business models where I guess we've got a good sort of sample of that today with the major labs, bigger labs, smaller labs, and then Propel 3D, just I guess having that more innovative print in clinic business model. So I have found just as a podiatrist who's both working on both sides, just the few advantages of being able to turn things around really quickly, have the materials be different in different ways has been really helpful. But at the end of the day, I am the biggest fan of a nylon SLS printed device, and nothing, I don't think FDM printed is going to change that. So those machines are obviously, very expensive and very sophisticated compared to an FDM printer. So I do think there's plenty of space for that. In saying that, we have been able to sort of reduce the cost per orthotic quite significantly with this business model. So it will be quite an interesting time to see what happens and where I guess the podiatrist's feet move.
Given there's so much variability in manufacturing, I'll just throw it to the floor. Where do you guys think standardization under things like the Therapeutic Goods Authority, right? TGA, where do we think orthotics are going to be moving from a regulatory point of view, given that we don't have currently a firm consensus across all commercially available laboratories what orthotic theories are. I mean, there's patterns and similarities, but there's also very big differences in interpretation. Where do we see quality control coming from standardization? Ken, I probably would start with you with this one.
Look, I don't think we necessarily need to, standardize, um, manufacturing processes, to the degree of, specific modeling pathways and things like that. It's probably more about standardizing um, um, outcomes, in terms of finished product, trying to make sure that, we can track processes, we can track devices all the way through and also continue to track them, once they're fitted to the patient as well. So I don't think we necessarily need to, all look the same, but I think there are some features that will all, probably inherently do now already, but continue to further develop and adopt things like that.
Rhys, where do you sort of see that sort of position?
Yeah, I don't see it changing rapidly in the short term. Albeit I think it would be beneficial for some manufacturer reform. Having worked with Stephen Brown at the APOD on the TGA advisory board for custom orthotics, we get a bit of an insight as to where things are going from a TGA perspective, and it's continually being progressed. But like most things, it's not fast. But I think it's really important that from a manufacturing perspective, we have transparency on how the products are made, where they're being made, what materials they're being made from, and we look at these products, in detail, to ensure safety, for the consumer.
So as you would know, I'm a coffee addict, so I like to shop it where I know the farmers are growing their beans. Is there a possibility that's translated into orthotic materials from where the manufacturers are overseas?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's important to understand like safety data sheets and what the products actually are, which is one of the strengths of the PA11, when it was first introduced to the profession. And it really took away from, I guess, the less environmentally friendly polypropylene at the time. So like on Konrad's point before with subtractive manufacture, I think it's important that we continually progress, and whether that's from a TGA perspective, I definitely think it's something that we should as a profession.
Conrad, was there anything you wanted to add on that?
Oh, the TGA, where do I start? You know what I mean? I think everyone's a little bit exasperated at times with I think maybe the lumping in of orthotic devices with other medical devices. Like, I think it's become quite clear that the TGA, they're probably working extremely hard, and maybe they don't have the bandwidth required to properly regulate and make a meaningful change in the way orthotics are manufactured in Australia. Because I think it's probably going to come down to our professional bodies being advocates for ethical manufacture. And I could get like a little bit controversial, but I don't personally think it's that controversial. I think maybe, we could regulate that orthotics aren't mirrored left and right. We should make a left and a right orthotic from each individual scan. Like, I think everyone here, because it's an audio medium, is nodding their head in agreement. So, which is good. But I think, it would be good to have that regulated. I think it would be good to regulate that scanning includes color, because from my experience, when we have anthropometric landmarks that are marked on a scan, we can translate features more objectively. And, if we're looking to do what the TGA want and what we support, which is things like making sure we have ISO 13485 for medical devices and making sure we have really good QMS, we have to make sure that we make things consistently, and the podiatrists have to help us do that. We have to be a team, right? So yeah, there's a few basic things there, but in terms of a TGA regulatory level, it's not really their place, and I don't think they're trying to standardize how we make orthotics or how software is used in the industry, more to just make sure that we have validation, verification processes in place to make sure that devices are safe and perform well, and we have material safety deductions. So I think it's not too stressful when you boil it down, the TGA stuff. It's more the labs having to put in place ISO at the end of the day, and we'll all get there. It might be a little bit harder for the smaller operators. I'm not sure how they're going to do it. If they're not using a software system that may be later regulated on the TGA, which would be called a medical device production system, right? If they're using one of these regulated systems, they might comply, inherently. But if they're vacuum forming or doing something a little bit different, they might have to get their own ISO, and it might be a big regulatory challenge for small business. So.
I think manufacturing seems to be on the ball from what all four of you have said. But let's bring it back to your first profession, which is podiatry. What does neutral mean? And can someone explain, is it reproducible? Is it still a useful theory to be applying in terms of teaching? And how do we accurately measure, or sorry, how do we actually accurately capture that?
Yeah, I guess the definition of neutral would be impartial or unbiased to a particular, in this case, position. So if we're talking about subtalar joint, then we're not, neutral would be unbiased to a particular position in relation to the subtalar joint. So I think it is important to try and achieve like subtalar joint neutral for orthotic reproducibility, but I think as well. It comes down to your understanding of the application of the prescription to the scan. So I'm sure people can achieve, the result that they're after by scanning in a unneutral, position. But certainly, I personally and we recommend as a lab trying to achieve a subtalar joint neutral position.
I think in terms of subtalar joint neutral, potentially it might even be in the weeds, considering what we pragmatically want is a foot that in subtalar joint neutral should be idealized where, obviously we can palpate the tailor heads. That's, week one of year two biomechanics, and we should be able to understand where that is and be able to teach that to people. But also just really simple things with those non-weight bearing scans. I'm sure everybody's seen, having like a ridiculously plantar flex foot, inverted foot, just in non-weight bearing, for the forefoot and rear foot to be completely out of whack. So I'm not too concerned with 1 or 2 degrees of subtalar, eversion, inversion, either way. Obviously, we can't capture a subtalar joint neutral with a foot that has a medially deviated subtalar joint axis and a supinatus where you can't capture it in neutral because the first MTPJ will be off the ground. So I think we should probably not sweat those things, and let's just get some nice square scans that we can create a good orthotic out of.
Darcy, what about heel expansion? Because if you're capturing someone non-weight bearing, what about different people with different fat pad sizes or pathological requirements might have different heel or skin fat expansions? Does a neutral cast non-weight bearing accurately capture the foot, in your opinion?
I don't think so. I would always go for a semi-weight bearing scan where possible. I'd personally, if I was making my grandmother a foot orthotic, I would like her to have a semi-weight bearing scan.
Ken, where are your sort of thoughts on foot capture?
I think you probably know where I stand on this, Pat. We absolutely believe that subtalar joint neutral is still relevant and still should be taught. I think we have to be careful that any potential trend away from neutral isn't just convenience masquerading as progress.
Mhm.
I think when we look at, if we sort of dig down a level here, when we look at scans or casts that come through the lab, I think one of the biggest issues that we see probably isn't so much around subtalar joint neutral. I think you can be out by 1 or 2 degrees either way, and it doesn't affect the plantar contours that much. I think where we see a bigger difference is when the mid-tarsal joint's not loaded. So I can take the same person, and that person might have a big 4-foot supinatus. And if in one capture method, scan, cast, I load that mid-tarsal joint and eliminate any 4-foot supinatus and capture a 4-foot to rear foot, pretty neutral sort of relationship. And then on the other foot, I maintain their whopping big supinatus. In that one where I've captured a big supinatus, every lab can do it. We can take that and produce a custom foot orthotic, but there's more guesswork involved.
Mm.
There's absolutely more guesswork involved. So that's where, it comes back to this, reduce the variability, start with a consistent starting point, and you reduce some of that guesswork along the way. So in terms of your question around heel fat pad, we have, data from thousands and thousands of devices that have come through the lab around how much expansion we should do based purely on the size of the foot. Now that can be varied as well. So let's say, you've got a patient in front of you and you know that they're going to fit into a particular dress shoe. You might communicate to the lab, hey, I want a minimal lateral plaster expansion on this one. I just want to bring it in a bit tighter. And we can do that. So that's, that can be varied accordingly.
Yeah, I think the point you make about thinking about the shoe that you're trying to fit it into is something that I learnt to my cost when I was a practitioner. It's you can make the perfect orthotic, but if it doesn't fit into any shoes, or then you've got a problem.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
In your opinion, gents, let's take the heel expansion equation out of the question. What's wrong with doing a really low, if not minimal, heel cup and getting someone in a shoe with a stiff heel counter to kind of counteract that? Maybe I'll direct that one to Rhys.
Yeah, that's a really good point because I think when we try and measure like fat pad expansion, we're not really factoring in the relationship of the shoe to that fat pad expansion. And it's a similar principle when we look at modifications like medial flares, because is the liner of the shoe or the outsole of the shoe, the shoe itself, is that capturing and holding in some of that splay that you would see when you have that patient weight bear over the orthotic outside of the shoe. So yeah, look, we would have a high percentage of concave wedge style orthotics that have approximately an 8 mil, lateral height of an orthotic. That would be our most commonly prescribed heel cup option. But at the same time, we have standard processes for heel pad expansion. So, if you use a concave wedge, it's 4 mil wider than the impression. We have the option for corkful heel, which is no expansion. You can then go and create, more expansion, so you choose. So I think it's about empowering that individual to understand what they require clinically, how they can achieve that, and providing the podiatrist with the tools to achieve what they want to achieve.
All right. This takes us to our unpopular opinions segment, overrated and underrated. The plan is for a quick fire, but I think if you guys are happy to expand, we're willing to take on that feedback. And I'm going to start with Darcy first, and I'm just going to repeat what we said. Subtalar neutral casting, overrated or underrated?
Underrated.
Rhys?
Sorry, quick fire, but I was on mute. Underrated as well.
Konrad?
All right. It's a more nuanced answer. You know what I mean?
Please go.
Yeah.
Look,
Bring nuance.
it's both, honestly. It's underrated by people, in my experience, that don't pay particular attention to how they hold and capture the foot, right? And I can't remember exactly how Kent put it, but it was if we basically let old habits die out of convenience, that's when it goes that way, right? When we see the 42-degree 4-foot supinatus not holding the foot, and we're going, well, you got to scan that again, that kind of thing. Overrated when it's used as a be-all and end-all treatment position. It's just a way to consistently capture the foot. It's just a shape, right? So you might maximally pronate the subtalar joint in a particular patient and capture it like that. So what is more important is shape, undoubtedly.
Okay.
Underrated. That's why we developed the scan mate.
All right.
Got to get the scan made in. So I use it myself. Yeah.
Next one, 3D printed orthotics, and I'm going to put in PA12 and 11 in the same box here. Darcy, overrated or underrated?
Underrated.
Rhys,
12 overrated, 11 underrated.
can you expand?
It's just a better fit for our profession. I think weight-bearing orthoses, custom foot orthoses, 11 is far superior breaking strain compared to 12. So other applications, it's probably cheaper, more accessible, and therefore underrated for other applications and professions, but not ours. Quality.
Konrad?
Definitely underrated. We don't even know the possibilities yet. We've got so much more to do on them. So we need to keep delving into what they're capable of. We can print things that we don't even know exist yet. So just got to keep innovating and iterating.
Kent?
Can we add in 3D printed polyprop into
Sure.
this as well?
Sure.
Yeah.
We'll say underrated then.
Awesome.
Awesome. So guys, highly posted and aggressive orthotic designs. Is that something that you think we're going too far in the aggressive end or not too much? So Kent, what are your thoughts on highly posted orthotics?
I'll say overrated. Keep it simple. Stick with the KISS.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Darcy?
Yeah, definitely echo Kent, keep it simple, scientist. But in saying that, it's got to still be, the clinical reasoning still has to be valid. So we still have to be trying to hit the right tissue with the right force at the right time, or else it doesn't really matter how aggressive it is.
Rhys?
If pathomechanically indicated, then underrated. Otherwise, all other times overrated.
And Konrad?
I would say when they're really, really aggressive, it's usually because it's a bad scan with many overlapping prescriptive variables in the same spot. Your heel skive with a medial wedge with an inverted scan, and then it's got a huge supinatus. So yeah, it's definitely overrated, but if it's needed, then underrated. Same as Rhys. So it's
All right. Next one, we're going to go vacuum pressed or vacuum formed rear foot EVA posts. Kent.
Look, I still love them. So I think neither. I think both have a place, and it's about understanding the material properties, the mechanics of the materials. So yeah, it's hard for me to commit one way or the other. It's more about the understanding.
Konrad?
Yeah, both as well. If you think you need to adjust it, then it may be useful, but definitely overrated for people that aren't measuring the shoes properly, because it is easy to fit them. You just got to measure the shoes and trace a template. So,
Rhys?
Overrated.
Do tell.
I thought it was quickfire, Pat. I think it's a legacy application from vacuum pressing and other forms of manufacture. I think if you're following that tissue stress model, like everyone said, and you are applying something to aid or an orthotic to aid in that process, you should be comfortable with where that support is. If you feel like you might need to adjust that support over a period of time or adjust that orthotic over a period of time, it's probably worth considering. But is that an overall orthotic application review then, as opposed to, a modification like an EVA review or an EVA heel stabilizer review? But at the same time, we've all said we can easily adjust orthoses. So if you do, put a PA11, heel stabilizer on there, and you want to decrease, load through the medial tubercle of the calc, you can easily put a post motion grind on, your heel stabilizer.
Do you ever think vacuum press would ever go away, given that there will be circumstances where patients may need that sort of device? And obviously 3D printing and whatnot is the way of the future. Do you think vacuum presses would actually ever go away or just reduce?
Vacuum pressing devices in terms of manufacture or
As well as
modification?
vacuum pressing EVA posts and things
Yeah,
like that.
I think it will eventually be superseded by additive manufacturing techniques. And like I think what Konrad said around TPU, I just don't think we have that same scope and quality yet with some products in comparison to subtractive manufacture. I think innately there'll always be a place for a lot of things because of what people are comfortable using, and therefore EVA heel stabilizers will probably continue to be a thing. But I would see and suggest that we're starting to see a decrease in that, largely around combination of orthotic and footwear as well.
Thus,
Yeah, I'd say overrated. Again, just be the practitioners and labs that are used to using that, probably be the people that continue to use it, not necessarily because that's the most superior way. And there's nothing wrong with that, but yeah.
All right, guys, prefabs. I guess as a kind of precursor to orthotics, to custom orthotics. Overrated or underrated as a treatment modality? Darcy?
Um, I think underrated as a treatment modality, but overrated as a medium to long-term modality where the outside of the customization of getting the tissue stress to change where you want it, I think podiatrists don't give enough credence to compressive loads versus tensile loads. The amount of medial skives with an aperture that I have seen would suggest that. And also we just get a better quality of materials under the person's foot that's going to do a better job for a better amount of time than a prefab. So that's the way that I communicate about it.
Rhys, where do you see a place for prefabs?
Yeah, there's definitely a place for it. I think as a profession, being podiatrist, it's probably overrated. So I think, as a profession, it should be something that we prioritize and continue to develop with custom foot orthoses. Definitely a place for it as a product within the profession, but I'd say on the whole, particularly in that early 1 to 4 year career, podiatrist, they're probably overrated, prefabs.
Konrad?
Yeah, I don't think I know any podiatrists that don't also do prefabricated orthotics. So they're definitely not overrated prefabs. Yeah, so definitely can work well and is a good treatment modality. So I'm kind of in the middle on this one as well. Sorry. So
And Ken?
I'm probably more aligned with Rhys's philosophy on this. Yeah, I think one of the things that we need to be aware of as a profession is what separates us from physiotherapy or chiropractic or these kinds of things. And I think our deep understanding of custom foot orthotics and their place in the treatment is certainly something that separates us and shouldn't be underrated.
okay. This one's from one of our listeners. 3D printed polypropylene. Why can't we just use polypropylene? Overrated or underrated? I want to start with you, Konrad.
Oh, because it's extremely laborious in a manufacturing environment to vacuum form when your manufacturing has moved towards 3D printing. And also, we can just do so much more with 3D printed shells and the CAD as well. And it doesn't allow us to leverage CAD as well. When we use vacuum forming techniques, we're making foot positive blocks, and our staff have to put masks on to deal with dust from wood or different types of foams. And we would much prefer a better manufacturing environment for our staff than that. So I think due to potential and, it would also be fairly bad business for a lab to not embrace 3D printing given where the industry is heading.
Rhys?
Yeah, probably echo the sentiments of Konrad. I think 3D printing and progressive or being progressive as an industry is really important. How a 3D printed poly versus traditional poly, whether that be CNC milled or vacuum pressed, how they're derived is very different. So, 3D poly, and Kent can probably speak to this a little bit more, 100% recyclable. There's definitely, advantages in 3D printed poly compared to typical polypropylene.
Ken?
Well, you can still do vacuum form poly. We offer both. And to be honest, I'm proud that we still do that. We still have the ability to do, plaster positives, all of that kind of stuff all the way through, and have managed to embrace, 3D printing and 3D printing polypro. Again, it just comes down to understanding from the clinician's perspective what they can and can't do with each method. There are some pros and cons of both methods. So understanding from the clinician's perspective what they are is critical. But yeah, I'm really proud that we've retained those really bespoke craftsmanship sort of skills for the industry. I think it's just understanding from the clinician's perspective what they can and can't do.
Darcy?
I'd say I'm impartial. I did always really appreciate a CNC polyprop device, but yeah, I'd say I'm impartial. I'd say to the person who asked the question, what's the problem?
Oh, well, they're probably listening, so they'll probably ask that question. All right, last one, probably the biggest one. In-clinic manufacturing, overrated or underrated? I'll probably start with you, Rhys.
I think empowerment of the profession is really important. So if that's something that the consumer, the podiatrist it's important to them, then I'd probably say underrated.
Okay. Ken?
Look, I think it comes back to, some of the early points we discussed about the relationship you have with your lab. I think by and large, labs do a really good job of taking the intent from the clinician and with the help of a prescription form, producing a device that has a therapeutic effect for your patient. And I think that's a relationship to be really highly valued. So if you believe that you can achieve the same results by doing it in-house, absolutely.
Konrad?
Yeah, it's definitely underrated. We had like a philosophy 10 years ago where, going to write software and, try and teach as many podiatrists as possible how to use it, because we saw the progression and the evolution of the industry being with podiatrists doing more design and more CAD. So we appreciate a manufacturing landscape where labs are, an open book, letting people learn their CAD processes. And we've seen that over the last few years, which has been a bit of a change, which has been good. And I think anything that develops more skills within the practitioner that is directly seeing the patient is probably going to be good for the patient, so long as that, it sort of takes me back to what I mentioned before. We don't want to see in-clinic 3D printing where clinicians are taking much larger shortcuts, mirroring devices, things like that, and doing a disservice to the profession as well. So we want to make sure it's really, um, done to an ethical standard, basically, in clinic and in the labs. So,
Das, finish us off.
I think if we're playing the game to its form, I'd say underrated. But to flesh that out, I think that echoing all the sentiments, Kent's point around the relationship being super critical, that is obviously very important. But Konrad did raise a very good point regarding the quality, and that each individual person who has access to a 3D printer and potentially some software are not necessarily going to produce good orthotics. Where there is, in our experience, as with these guys, a highly iterative process is required to produce something of quality. I think it is good for the podiatrist to be able to see how the cake is baked, per se. But all things considered, in Australia we do have some quite good quality labs where we're getting quite good quality orthotics. So podiatrists are very lucky to have that. But I do think that having access and understanding what orthotics will be better for what case is something. Also, the podiatrist does have to often do some post-processing too. So it depends how time poor they are. They may have to still put a cover on that device. They may not have the time. But yeah, generally underrated.
Awesome. All right. Well, moving into the close of this fantastic session, for the panel, what's one thing you would change about how you'd approach orthotic therapy starting tomorrow as a clinician? What would you recommend them to think about starting tomorrow with their practice? Darcy?
Keep it simple, understand your materials, think a bit harder about the clinical reasoning.
Konrad?
Understand that your prescription is basically a set of instructions to interpret CAD design. So if you don't know how to design orthotics with software, you should speak to your lab and go in and sit next to them and watch them actually design, or learn how to do it yourself, because it's going to make a profound difference on your understanding of prescription. And if I can have one more, it would be basically connect foot capture very closely and really critically think about foot capture in the context of manufacturing, how important it is, because that is the number one issue we see in the lab is poor quality foot capture and no measurements of scans.
Kent, is it about subtalar joint neutral?
Look, I'd probably say go and spend some time in the lab, as Konrad said. I think that is, such, a valuable thing for the clinician to do. Make an appointment with your lab, go and have a chat with them, see how their devices are modeled, how they're made, understand what the options are, what they mean, what they look like. It's well worth your time, and it's well worth the lab's time as well.
And Rhys?
Establish what is the objective of your orthotic. Understand the tissue stress model and the application of pathomechanical prescribing, and combine those with rapport and relationship with your lab to achieve what you want to achieve as a podiatrist.
I guess for our final strides, this has probably been one of the most comprehensive recorded conversations about orthotics we've had in Australia. So I would like a timeless perspective from each and every one of you about something that's held true to your beliefs throughout your career on orthotics. Kent, I'll probably start with you, given you're our Commonwealth Games / Olympic podiatrist. What's sort of one principle that's helped you throughout your career, and is that something you're happy to share with us?
In terms of orthotic prescription from a clinical standpoint?
The world is your oyster, my friend.
Look, get the patient comfortable. Simple as that. We can overcomplicate things, but sometimes we just need to strip it back and get them comfortable.
Rhys?
Time time is your friend. Don't expect that from the moment you're patient or you stand on the orthotic or it's within the shoe. There's no silver bullet. Was that what they call it, Pat? Time is your friend. Trust and back your confidence, and then allow for time.
Darcy.
The best orthotic is the one that the person will wear.
Great. And Konrad.
Yeah, look, everyone knows that I'm a bit of a broken record when they come and do training sessions with me, but it's just, that the scan is fundamentally the most important thing for the lab, and that it should be clearly measured by the clinician. That's held true.
Thank you to all of our panelists for contributing to what's probably one of the most important discussions, especially for our younger listeners. Hopefully we can get you back on for round 2 or potentially see you at the SEPA conference.
Thanks, Pat. Thanks
very
JP.
much.
Thanks, Jens.
Thanks, Matt.